I wanted to especially mention and explain on the last slide where I stated in one of the bulleted points that IDEA in 2004, well, in its first iteration in the early 1970s, then again in 2004, and then again in 2015, IDEA is really the federal law that provides funding at a federal level for special education. Michigan receives X amount of dollars every year from our federal government to ensure students with disabilities have educational services, but the state also has to pay for some of that. So that's where the difference comes between federal and state. This hits a nerve for me. I'm a member of the Michigan CEC Board. That's the Council for Exceptional Children, which is also a national organization. It's kind of the national organization and professional organization for special educators. We're part of an advocacy group where we contact both our federal and state legislators to ensure that the laws are being enforced, that are good for students, all students, but also students with disabilities, and that there's appropriate funding. We're in a really weird time right now because funding has increased drastically over the last couple of years, especially with COVID in the mix. But the one thing that hasn't happened is fully funding of IDEA. IDEA has never been funded by the federal government at more than 15% of its total cost. It's an assumed funded project, not a guaranteed funded project. So, in my opinion, this is a gender word opinion, essentially the federal government tells us that we have to follow these regulations. We have no choice but to follow these regulations, and then only gives us less than a third of the amount of money that we need to meet those regulations. The Council for Exceptional Children on a national level made this one of their main advocacy and legislative actions about a year ago, 2 years ago. And I've linked two things for you on this screen, on this slide. First of all, I've linked the CEC IDEA brief. It is a 2-pager. It takes all of chapter 3 from our text and boils it down to 2 pages. I think it's a great resource and it has some great visuals. So I encourage you to check that out. The other link is the last article and piece of information I could find through CEC that mentions legislative action toward what we call IDEA full funding glide path. As a legislative committee, we know that if we go to the federal government and say, you must fund IDEA at 100%, that's never going to happen. It's millions and millions and millions of dollars over the increase of a year. It's just not going to happen. So we've laid out a 10-year glide path to full funding where if it was passed this year, by 2034, we'd reach the full funding capacity at what the federal law promises. That doesn't mean that the federal government comes in and pays for everything. All we're asking is for the federal government to pay for what they originally said they would pay for. Please do some digging, educate yourself a little bit on the needs and the funding piece. And if you're so inclined, keep an eye out for what are called legislative calls to action through CEC. Becoming a member is also very important. And keep an eye on this politically. It's important for your future career and professionally. But I believe, especially after you see this week's documentary, I think it's something that all people and all parents and all communities should be concerned about. So dig into this a little bit. Contact me if you have any questions, and keep doing the good work.